Before today's topic, a quick disclaimer. The stories and data we share come from the states that we practice in and the experiences we personally had, which can differ greatly across our country and certainly the globe. This is not a professional advice show. So get comfy and let's discuss death.
Hello, and welcome to MortMic, a down-to-earth discussion on death and dying. I'm Jem.
And I'm Red, and this week, we are your rescuers of the reposed. Not all bodies get to be returned to their home. Some are victims of war overseas, others are lost in natural disasters. But today, our main focus is going to be on extreme sports enthusiasts that push themselves to the limit, and sometimes they don't make it back alive.
Not every place that a person dies is easy to access. I pulled some pretty big people out of some pretty tight bathrooms, I can tell you that. Well, we can find ourselves in really sticky situations that we create our own permanent final resting place that others can't get to or get us out of. Some bodies are just unreachable.
I think we should start at a high point with some mountain deaths. Can we put in some treesy drum sound effect here? I think that's the time for it.
Oh, I didn't even get that pun. I was like, what? Boom.
There we go. As long as humans and mountains have been around, we've been trying to climb to the top of them. I'm mainly going to be talking about one specific mountain today, however, and that is Mount Everest, because there is so much data and articles about it. I went down like a 3-day rabbit hole just researching like one mountain. Like it's insane. So Mount Everest is the mountain I picked because there have been about 300 deaths on it as compared to other mountains. I'll talk about some a little bit later on. So when you think about how people die on a mountain, like our minds would normally go to like exposure, exhaustion, and that does make up a huge majority of the deaths, but it's not as big as some of these other ones, which I thought were really interesting. Avalanches account for nearly half of the deaths on Mount Everest. And some other ways to die that are pretty metal, honestly, if you look at it. You can just get crushed by a giant pillar of ice the size of a house. Like that's a thing. Like on multiple of the death certificates,
What?
death by Sirac was the method of death, which is what that's called. Insane. Some of the other smaller causes of death on the mountain are going to be things like health problems, heart attacks, strokes, injuries from falling off the mountain, and very rarely disappearances, but that still happens. Some people, you just can't find them. They just get buried underneath something, a rock or snow, and just no one ever finds them. So we can't really get an accurate cause of death. And it's really hard to remove these bodies from the mountain. It's already hard enough to climb the mountain, so to bring somebody else back down with you that's died it's like near impossible. Some people can fall into I never know how to say this. Crevice or crevasse? Crevasse. I sound so
Crevasses.
So
I
British.
say it's crevice singular and crevasses plural, but that's just me.
Okay. So some people will actually get frozen to the mountain when they die there. So like to take a body, which is already, like 150 to 200 pounds of like athletic hiker and all this ice that's attached to it, like that's a lot of weight to be carrying down the mountain.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of true. I don't know if there's a science behind this, but I feel like frozen bodies are a little bit heavier than fresh bodies. Maybe it's just because they're so stiff and it's so difficult to carry them. But I've definitely had my experience of frozen bodies up here in the north. Grandpa falls down outside, has a heart attack, and no one finds him for 2 days, and it's negative 10 degrees outside. That's pretty much the same effect, I feel.
I think so too. There must be something with like the crystallization of the water vapor in the air or something that adds the weight. I have no idea, but I see where you're coming from with that, and I agree. So say that you did lose a loved one to the mountain, and you wanted to have them back. bring them back home. This is going to cost a lot of money. It costs thousands of dollars to climb the mountain itself, like to go on an expedition up to the top. It's about like 30 to 80,000, depending on how sketchy you want to hire a Sherpa.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that. What the hell?
Yeah, that is a lot of money.
That's crazy.
But then to bring a body down, you're gonna tack like a few tens onto that, just depending on who will do it for you and how high up the mountain somebody is. And like you would hope like, oh well, yeah, like just use a helicopter, but you can't because the hurricane force winds that are always surrounding like the mountaintop at the summit. So like there's absolutely no way that the helicopter can make it up there. There's actually a place on the north face of the mountain, being the harder of the two faces to climb between the north and south. It's got a stretch on it called the Rainbow Ridge, and they call it that because of all of the dead bodies that are there with all of their colorful climbing and winter gear that just like pepper that part of the slope.
That's so crazy. I can't imagine like climbing a mountain and walking by like a bunch of dead bodies and being like, yeah, okay, we're going to keep doing this.
Yeah, let's just keep going. Like, this is a great idea.
This is not my cup of tea at all. I just like more power to you guys, but like, I just don't understand why anyone would want to do this.
There's even been parties of people who have died trying to get bodies off the mountain who have died. Like, oh, no. So just creating a pile of corpses.
Oh, no.
It's absolutely crazy.
That's so bad.
There's actually, interesting enough, a controversy surrounding removing bodies from the mountain. So some climbers, their wishes, like they already know the dangers of climbing Mount Everest. And some climbers, their wishes are actually, if I die on the mountain, leave me on the mountain. Like I want to stay there. I want to be left on the mountain that I tried to conquer. There's others that, especially locals, that actually believe the mountain to be a sacred place. And so like having bodies strewn everywhere is kind of like dishonoring the gods that they believe in that like inhabit the mountain and like their religions and stuff. And then of course there's the families that want to bring bodies home. So like we have a lot of interesting like politics that happen to be surrounding like death and bodies on the mountain. So as time is going on, more bodies are being uncovered on the mountain, like with glacial melting. Some bodies move due to wind. So if they had fallen into a place that they weren't able to be reached before, like the wind could push them even farther down the slope into a path that is normally traveled. And some expeditioners even will move bodies that are like in the middle of a path off to the side. There have been like honorable burials given by pushing bodies like into crevasses or like stones being piled up like cairns. So it's like there's some sense of decency because a lot of these people are dying like in the path of other climbers. So like there are going to be many more expeditions and people walking past them. And so like being gawked at it's kind of like traumatic for these families at home knowing that like their loved one is being trekked by.
That's kind of like oddly nice in a way, like taking care of your own, you know what I mean? In a weird way, it's like having your own like climber ceremony for those who have like gone before you. I think it's really nice actually that people do that. I didn't know that.
There are a few famous bodies on the mountain. That sounds so really weird to say, but but they essentially become landmarks on the trail. Someone that many have probably actually heard of is Green Boots. It's one of the most common people that you would pass on the way up the mountain. He was never properly identified, but determined based on like who was going up the mountain around that time frame and like who like was basically who didn't come home. It was assumed to be Suang Peljor. His nickname comes from the green hiking boots that he was wearing before he climbed under a rocky overhang where he died of exposure. So pretty much every single hiker coming up the north side of the mountain is going to be passing like next to his alcove where he was. There was actually another climber, David Sharp. He died likely of hypothermia. He died in the same cave after he tried to attempt a solo climb. So he actually climbed in there and died next to Green Boots. It's kind of sad he only gets known as his moniker. Like even the Wikipedia page that I was like looking up some stuff on has no page for the person as like his name. It's just it always redirects to Green Boots. So like it kind of is sad that like his name is like lost to time essentially.
Like I said before though, I think that it's a weird sort of like comfort I'm not a climber, so I don't know. So you can tell me if I'm wrong. But like having these people and their bodies on the trail, it kind of is like these people tried to do this before me and they're still here and they were climbers like me. It kind of is a reminder of like how careful you have to be and like how dangerous it is. And I want to say like that green boots is like watching over these people, because if you see a dead guy, like you're probably going to try to be a little bit more careful than if you just like were willy-nilly like trudging up there. I don't know.
Sure, absolutely. One of the other famous people on the mountain is renamed as Sleeping Beauty. Her name is Frances Arsentiev. She was the first woman to summit without the use of additional oxygen, but she died of exposure on the descent. So she actually was able to make it to the top,
Wow.
but she summited really late in the day, and like there were some complications with their equipment, so that made it a lot more complicated to come back down when it was later. And she became separated from her husband, Sergei. He tried to climb back up and help her, but her condition was so critical at that point. He was actually found dead himself by fall by another expedition on a lower part of the mountain. And she was lastly found by another climber, Ian Woodall. He found her on his way up and actually stayed with her during her dying moments, and like actually gave up his shot to summit because he'd stayed with her. And like even more like hallmarky story here, he actually returned many years later because like it just sat with him that he wasn't able to like save her that day. And she had been on the trail for like 9 years at this point, and on memory alone, he returned to the place that he left her and dug through like 4 feet of snow and found her on the second try. Like that is absolutely insane to me that he was able to do that. Like
that's so like heartwarming in a weird way. I don't know. Like I'm all about like camaraderie and like, looking out for your fellow man, but like I don't know. It's just like it's so sad, but like it's so nice that people think to do these kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was able to basically give her, you know, the quote unquote honorable burial I talked about. They wrapped her in an American flag, and she was lowered as carefully as you can be off the side of the mountain, and with the hope that she would be dropped to the location that her husband had fallen to as well.
Oh, yeah.
I thought this was actually, as I was reading through this story, this did go through my mind as a question myself. I was like, well, what about like the rest of the family? Did they say this was okay? The son was never contacted for permission to do this. He actually had to find out via like the news. Like he just was watching the news one day and like this story was on there. It's like, dude, that's my mom. Like,
wow.
But
was he okay with it?
He eventually, like after, you know, kind of getting to think through it, he was actually okay with it because he, you know, this person, you know, Ian Woodall was with her when she died. Like that was something that his son could never have had. And like he understood that there must have had some like climbing bond together that, you know, he felt the need to take care of her one more time. And so like he eventually was okay with it. But to wrap up at Mount Everest, I wanted to do a good little bit of statistics because you know I love a good statistic plug.
We love a good statistic plug.
We love our numbers here. So the chances of dying on the mountain are about 1%. It used to be about 2% in the 70s and 80s, so it's getting a little safer every year. But I think it's just because everyone knows Mount Everest because it's the tallest mountain. So a lot more adrenaline junkies are seeking to climb it. But it's also had like a lot of successful ascents, and it's really well mapped and traveled. So I think that's why the percentage is so low. The ratio of deaths to successful climbs is about 1 death to 80 successes. So that's not so bad, I guess.
I guess. I don't know. I still feel like that's a lot. I don't know how many people climb it though.
And I guess that doesn't include, those numbers don't really include anybody who hasn't finished. Like there's probably a bunch of people that like started and haven't finished that aren't part of that statistic too.
Right.
But you want to compare that to the second largest mountain to climb in the world, K2. There's only been 355 successful summits ever, and there's been a whopping 82 deaths. That's a 23 fatality rate. So like Everest is crazy and all, but K2, like that's where you go to really show off.
To die.
To die.
Please don't, guys.
But online, you can see some of the pictures of these bodies that are on the mountain, like Green Boots and Sleeping Beauty. But like it's all older photography, like current photography. Like it's so disrespectful. Like that's not a thing you'll see. But expeditioners often have to trek right near these bodies, as many people die as they climb, and bodies of the fallen will settle and be uncovered by the elements in the flat areas where camps are set up. This is something climbers have to be prepared for. It's honestly super crazy to think that some of these people actively dying on the path were already assumed to be dead, or they had to be passed by because saving them would actually have endangered the other climbers. So, like, please, like, go down a rabbit hole, like, yourself on Mount Everest and deaths on Everest, because it's absolutely insane. Like, I wanted to talk about so many more things, like the death rate for Sherpas, like specific cataclysmic avalanches and earthquakes that have caused mass death on the mountain, and the increase in ascenders causing backups on the mountain. There's so much topics out there. Like, please, like, definitely look into this if it interests you. I
Wow.
barely scratched the surface.
It sounds like we could have like a 3-part series on like Everest deaths and everything that happened
It's
there.
definitely.
It's so interesting. When compared to climbing, there aren't any caves with the death count that Everest has. Statistically, it's about half as dangerous to go spelunking than it is to climb a mountain. But that doesn't mean that the situations that cause people to lose their lives underground aren't just as tragic and terrifying.
So if you thought dying on a frigid, cold mountain between a rock and a hard place were tough, wait until you hear about caving. All of the mountains that I researched had such badass names, but the juxtaposition of the names of the caves I'm about to talk about and the morbidity of those who have died in them it's a wee bit comical.
I'm so excited to hear.
So this one surprised me too when it comes to like causes of death. The highest rate of death in caves, it comes from 2 different things. Do you want to take a guess at what those might be?
I would guess like collapses and like lack of oxygen.
Okay, so you're close. You got one of them. So
Oh.
falls and rock falls are the highest. So you falling into a hole or a rock falling on you.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the big ones that I didn't even consider was drowning. So I'm not talking about like cave diving deaths specifically. I'm like talking about flooding.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that caves like flooded. I guess maybe in movies they kind of show that sometimes, right?
Yeah, like I've seen like, you know, in The Descent, the movie The Descent, like there's water in the caves, and I know like I've been in a few caves myself, and it's wet, you know, it's underground, but like legitimately funny. Like essentially like some of these cave systems, you're in a giant like tube of likely porous rocks, and like what will happen if it rains topside, you're a sitting duck, because it'll just, all this water will start to filter down to your level and like flood parts of the cave, so you can't like get back the way you came, or you'll just like be crawling in a tube and just drown. Like,
Wow. Yeah.
absolutely crazy. Like some of the other causes of death, yet again, are going to be like health issues. It's a physically demanding extreme sport, you know. So if you're already kind of, you know, battling your own illnesses, like this is not something that is recommended. Exposure and exhaustion are also up there. I mean, it gets really cold underground, especially if you're wet, and extremely tiresome. Some of the super rare causes of death are going to be, like you mentioned, bad air or like lack of oxygen. Histoplasmosis and leptospirosis are another one, which is like a fungal or a bacterial infection. And like one of the most rare ways of dying, which also a surprise to me, is getting lost. I would have thought that would be way up there, but apparently it's super rare. Okay, so here comes time where I get to unveil like the best worst name for a cave ever. And our first topic when it comes to caves, which is Schrodinger's Pants Cave.
Schrodinger's pants?
Schrodinger's pants. Like, so we've all heard of like Schrodinger's cat, but no, this is not some weird science joke to do with his theories. It's actually named after the explorer who found the cave, who, as the name would indicate, tore the buns of his pants during one of the explorations into the cave system.
Very interesting.
So a caver named James Mitchell found himself suspended on a rope in a 75-foot pit in this cave system, and was being continuously drenched by a frigid waterfall. This is back in like 1965. There was a 3-day rescue effort trying to reach him, but he died so early in this timeline that the mission was eventually aborted. And a cave-in due to them drilling trying to get to him actually further stymied the already impossible task. His body was eventually lowered down, and the cave was abandoned and blasted shut. and a headstone was placed at the mouth in memory of him.
Wow, that's so crazy. Can you imagine 3 days hanging there on a rope being drenched by a waterfall? He died pretty early, you said, but still, that's crazy. 1 day is enough.
Yeah, 1 day is way, way, way enough. They did actually try to recover his skeleton after about 41 years later. They had found, like many caves, a lot of times they'll find like an alternate opening or like another system that connects. And so they attempted to go back in, and 6 workers spending 4 hours were actually able to get to him, which at this point, of course, he was just bones. But they were able to rescue what they were able to find, and then also found his helmet. It had like 18 notches carved in it, which denoted the 18 caves that he had explored successful. So a really interesting thing to take away, and was actually given to his family, I'm pretty sure.
Wow, that's cool.
He was cremated by the local coroner, and the family actually plans on spreading his ashes really close to the cave in memory of even though it was traumatic, in memory of the trip that he had taken.
Right. Near Schrodinger's pants. What's another good name for a cave we're going to learn about today?
Well, let me tell you, Jem. Let's try on Nutty Putty Cave for size.
Nutty Putty. What the heck?
So this one, yet again, all of the caves have the reason for the naming. This one is named because of the density and like kind of like soil that's in the cave. It's like kind of muddy, so they named it Nutty Putty.
Of course.
Like any good scientist or explorer would. I would never name something legitimately well thought out name. So Nutty Putty was actually it's considered by many a good like beginner cave, like a good starter cave to experience what it's like to do some spelunking. We'll find that it was actually quite dangerous for a gentleman named John Jones. He attempted with some buddies to go through the birth canal squeeze, which is a actually very doable section of the cave, but he actually ended up in a completely uncharted part of the cave instead.
Before we get further, can I birth canal squeeze? Is that really what it's called?
Okay, listen. Okay, so yeah, the cave name whack, but like if you go and look up like all of the different parts of Nutty Putty Cave, because like they're broken into different segments. Yet again, more crazy names for like all these different like things that people have to travel through. Like
oh my gosh.
Clearly, like spelunkers have a great sense of humor when it comes to their craft.
Wow.
So this poor dude goes into this uncharted part of the cave, and he ended up becoming wedged head first, like downward facing, in a tube that was no wider than the opening of a dryer, like the opening to a dryer. So after 28 hours of being inverted in this cave, there were many rescue attempts that led to even the rescuers themselves becoming injured and stuck. John did finally pass away after 28 hours, which yet again, like to be upside down, that is
goodness.
a million years.
That's so crazy.
It must have felt so long to him.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, you have to imagine, like, being upside down, like, people die even after just a few hours of having, like, the blood flow to their head or, like...
Right.
28 hours. Like, what an absolute badass.
That's insane.
So this cave itself has also been sealed. They put a concrete plug in, and a memorial plaque was erected at the entrance for him as well. If you want to learn more about this specific incident, there's a YouTube movie. Actually, I found that it's called The Last Descent, not to be confused with The Descent, which is also a cave movie, horror cave movie. But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. So without going down another rabbit hole, I also wanted to do an honorable mention for Mossdale Caverns. This is one of those situations where 6 men actually drowned in the depths of the cave because just a random huge rainfall happened. This is like, what is it, England? Heavy rainfalls are kind of common over there, but they weren't expecting that much weather. And yeah, a bunch of rain came down, and it was enough to actually swallow up the cave entrance, so they weren't able to get out. And when they went to discover the bodies, they had all drowned. So say you find yourself stuck in a cave, or injured or something like that. There's an actual specific subsect of wilderness rescue that contains the aspect of firefighting, confined space rescue, rope rescue, and mountaineering that basically make up the specialized career of cave rescue. And there's a very specific curriculum to join to be able to do this. It's typically done on a volunteer basis, and there's like a niche organization that's funded by donations like in every country. There's only a few organizations worldwide with very limited members, and they often have to work together due to their small ranks. So if somebody is to get stuck in a cave in the US, you're definitely going to be having rescue teams from around the world to come help. But not all deaths in caves are of the spelunkers who travel them. And this is a big one that hit the news, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people are familiar with it. The Thai cave rescue, where the junior football team got stuck in a cave after it flooded because of a monsoon. Have you heard of that one, Jem?
I actually have not heard of that one.
All right, so it was a big to do, and it mostly just because of the rescue efforts that had to be made because of it. None of the boys and their coach that got trapped died, but two of the rescue workers that tried to save them did.
Wow.
One from asphyxiation during the dive to get to the boys, and then the other actually died months later. He ended up getting a blood infection that he acquired while being in the cave. Even though these rescue teams work lengthy, exhausting hours on these rescue missions, the hard truth is that when someone dies in a cave, it's really difficult to retrieve them. It's not even a matter of money, but logistics and the safety of those who have to squeeze in after them. But if you were just starting to feel claustrophobic with the stories I told you, I think Jem might have something to tip us over the edge.
Exactly. If you thought spelunking was dangerous, try to combine that with scuba diving. We're going to talk about cave diving, which is something that I didn't think that people did, but it is something that people do because you guys are crazy, but I'm all here for it. So cave diving, if you don't know what that is, it's basically cave exploring, but with scuba diving equipment to explore these underwater caves, because under the ground there's lots of water and a lot of caves that are formed basically entirely underwater, and people just like dive down there to like look at them, I guess. But cave diving is actually, as you can imagine, pretty dangerous, combining the dangers of scuba diving along with the dangers of just cave diving in general. And what we're looking at in general is between July 1985 and June 2015, there is a report of a total of 161 diver deaths. 67 of these deaths were trained cave divers, people that had experience, and 87 of these deaths were untrained cave divers, which if you're untrained cave diver, what are you doing?
Right.
Get trained.
Right.
And while the annual number of cave diving fatalities has fallen over the past 3 decades, usually only like 3 a year, the proportion of trained divers among those fatalities has doubled. So actually a lot of people are getting trained, but it's, the dangers are still there regardless if you're trained or not. So the most common cause of death is usually asphyxia due to drowning, preceded by running out of breathing gas. If you're scuba diving and you go deep down and let's say, you're getting pressurized, you're getting excited or like anxious and you're breathing a lot more, you might not have calculated how much gas you need. So that's a pretty common cause of fatality. It is reported that an overwhelming majority of the fatalities occur in the state of Florida for some reason.
Florida man, I'm looking at you.
They have a lot of flooded caves, apparently. There's also, like I said, a possibility of equipment failure and hypercapnia, which is carbon dioxide poisoning. Carbon dioxide will absorb into your bloodstream much faster when you're deeper down. So this causes that carbon dioxide poisoning in your blood if you're not careful, if the equipment you're using is not up to snuff. And like I said, the equipment that they do use for that, it can get overloaded if you start breathing too quickly or if you start moving around too much. So it's really important to remain calm. Obviously, if you are in fear of your life, it's kind of hard to do that. Okay, so I'm absolutely going to murder the name of this cave, and I'm so sorry. It's located in Helsinki, so we're talking Finnish here, and I do not speak Finnish, unfortunately. But there were 5 men that were set to explore this cave, Steinugul Fall Get. And that's all I'm going to give you guys because that's all I got. Uh, and this is a pretty dangerous dive. It was a well-known cave diving expedition, and at the start of the cave, you're basically already underwater through the whole entire thing. So the start of the cave is a lake, like a pond. So you just go in and you get your diving gear ready, and then you go under. And the BBC actually did a story on this, and there's actually like a map of the cave. It's literally just like tiny nooks and crevices and like weird little descents and like crevices just full of water. So anyways, these 5 men decided to explore the cave, and they had been buddies like cave diving together for a while, and this was known to be a dangerous cave. So what had happened was that 2 of the men decided to go ahead a little bit, and no one is really sure what happened because one of the men started to panic. Maybe something was wrong with his equipment. He started breathing too fast. The second man that was with him noticed that something was wrong, and he tried to give him a cylinder of gas to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in his system. But while they were switching mouthpieces, the person that was giving him the gas started swallowing water and started to drown.
Oh, Jesus. That's terrifying.
So after this person who's already panicking is watching his buddy basically die, he got the air canister from his buddy, but he was unable to calm himself down, so he himself passed away a little bit while longer. The second group of men that were with them would eventually find them and would find that their bodies were blocking the way to the cave. So this is how narrow this cave is that one body was like blocking the whole entire thing. And then here they're already doing their own exploration. They're already having difficulties of their own, but they had to decide, do I move past this dead body to get to the end and try to, save myself that way? Or do I turn around and go back? Because at this point, they're pretty deep into the cave. They have to assess like how much oxygen they have left, how much further they have to go. They actually decided to move past the bodies because you can imagine trying to get these bodies unstuck and trying to pull them up with them, that they all would have died probably trying to get these bodies out of there. Yeah. So they had to make the tough decision to leave them there and then continue on with the exploration. But because of the situation and because they had to spend time getting past the bodies, they actually had to rise to the surface. I think it said 80 minutes early. So when it comes to diving, if you guys don't know, you have to depressurize very slowly. So you have to go up to the surface very slowly, or else you get decompression sickness called the bends.
Isn't it just like the expanding of the gas in your arteries and veins too fast?
Yeah, so it's basically when the nitrogen in your bloodstream starts to form gas bubbles because it is expanding too fast due to the pressurization like happening too quickly. So after the remaining 3 divers got through the expedition, they passed the bodies. They knew exactly where they were. They had to, call the cops to report the deaths. But because they were in Helsinki and there wasn't really an adequate rescue team, the police decided that they weren't really going to do anything about it. It was just too dangerous. That they didn't really have the right equipment. They didn't really know what to do. The families of the divers that perished, obviously wanted their loved ones back. And the men that they were diving with felt like they needed to rescue them. So that's exactly what they did. They worked with one of the rescue teams that Red was talking about to devise like a rescue plan to go and get the 2 bodies of their friends back. And this was a much more well thought out than the expedition. They had a lot more preparation. So essentially what they did, which I thought was really cool, is that they took air canisters and they put them along the trail. So like they would dive down a little bit, leave an air canister there, come back up, get another one, dive down a little bit more, leave an air canister there, come back up. So if anything happened, if they needed air, there would be like little checkpoints along the cave that they could go and get air, and they wouldn't have to worry about doing the whole dive on like the amount that they could carry on their body. So the friends that actually, were there when their friends died, they actually partook in the rescue mission, mostly because they knew exactly where their friends were, and they knew like the terrain, they knew the cave. So it was actually a British rescue team that was able to help them. Like Red said, these people, come from all over parts of the country because it's a very like specialized profession. When they got to the bodies, they had been there for some time. So obviously the bodies had taken on water. They had become more buoyant. So this kind of made things a little bit more difficult, harder to control. And part of the cave also collapsed on one of the bodies. But through the preparation that they had and working with the British rescue team, the whole operation of rescue took about 101 hours of diving time. So after 101 hours of diving time, they were able to rescue the bodies and have them, brought back to the family. And actually what they did was considered technically illegal because the Finnish police didn't want to do the recovery mission. But they were charged and all the charges were dropped. But it's just like a really, really cool story, honestly. And it's cool that it is, a dangerous sport that people do, and like they understand the risk of dying, and it's really, really scary. But like the people that were doing it with them were able to rescue the bodies and were able to bring closure to their family and kind of like be at peace with the situation.
Honestly, I think out of all of these like extreme sports, like cave diving sounds the most terrifying to me. Like essentially, like at least with spelunking, you still like feel the concept of gravity, but when you're in water, it's like this weightlessness, and like if you can't see, like God forbid your like headlamp goes out, and like you can't see which way your bubbles are going, so you don't know which direction you're going. Like, oh God, I see so many things going wrong, like underwater like that. Oh, that's just right. That sounds like so scary.
And the fact that you like cannot panic, like your breathing cannot accelerate or like you're going to die. So that's just like being able to remain calm in that situation. Like, I don't know how people do it, to be honest.
Yeah, honestly, I think I'm going to stick with normal sports for now and leave the adventuring to my D&D character.
So we only briefly touched on several of these extreme sport deaths, but if you're interested in something like this, there's a lot of articles, a lot of stories, a lot of documentaries out there that you can go and look up. We had a fun time looking into this, but obviously we can't talk about everything. We just don't have the time. But if you're into extreme sports yourself, more power to you. Just make sure you be careful and always check your equipment.
But that's going to be all for this week on MortMic. We'd love to connect with you guys on our socials, so like, follow, and subscribe to us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at MortMic Podcast. That's MortMicPodcast. It would mean a lot to hear your feedback, so please tell us what you think, get a comment, or drop us a rating on whatever podcast hosting site you use. If you have any suggestions on topics you'd like to hear about, or burning questions you might have about death, give us an email at mortmicpodcast@gmail.com.
I also want to give a huge thank you to our friend Marson for the use of his song titled Deputies of Death, which he produced just for our show. You can check out his Bandcamp at Marson, that's MARSON, music.bandcamp.com. Thanks, Marson.
And be sure to tune in every other week on Thursdays for more casual discussions on death. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been MortMic.
Bye.
Bye.